March 15th, 1994, Cook County Correctional Facility. Marcus Donnelly had been watching John Wayne Gacy through security cameras for 3 years. Tonight was different. 3 lifers cornered the serial killer in the laundry room at 2:47 a.m. Rodriguez, Williams, and Knox, all doing time for murders they swore they didn't commit.
Mac expected to watch Gacy die. Instead, he watched the killer do something that changed everything. Gacy didn't beg. He didn't fight. He pulled out a hand-drawn map from inside his shoe and started talking. In 60 seconds, he gave those 3 men something worth more than their freedom. He gave them proof. What happened next sent shockwaves through the Chicago Police Department. Files were sealed, transfers were ordered, and Mac realized the monster he'd been guarding might be the only honest man left in the building. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hook. Mac's coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but his hands still trembled as he gripped the styrofoam cup. The security monitor flickered with grainy black and white footage of the laundry room, now empty except for industrial washers humming their mechanical lullaby. But he could still see it happening. Gacy's weathered fingers tracing lines on that crumpled paper, his lips moving with the urgency of a dying confessor. Lot 47. Behind the old Biograph Theater, Gacy had whispered to Rodriguez, whose wife was doing 20 to life for allegedly murdering her ex-husband. 3 feet down northwest corner, you'll find Jimmy Torino's class ring and wallet. The real killer left them there in '89. Rodriguez had lunged forward, snatching the map, his face cycling through disbelief and desperate hope. Williams and Knox pressed closer as Gacy continued, his voice barely audible through the ancient audio system. Knox, your brother didn't kill that liquor store owner in Cicero. Check the storm drain on Laramie, 2 blocks south. The gun's still there, prints intact. Belongs to Detective Ray Kowalski's nephew, been protected by the badge for 5 years. Mac's blood had turned to ice water. He knew Kowalski, worked with him for 8 years before transferring to corrections. The man had 3 commendations and a reputation cleaner than Sunday morning. And Williams, Gacy had said, his pale eyes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Your mother didn't overdose accidentally. Check evidence locker 247 at the 12th District. Someone swapped the heroin for pure fentanyl. The paperwork will show who signed off on the evidence tampering. That's when the 3 prisoners had stepped back, the violence draining from their postures like air from punctured tires. Knox had actually stumbled, his makeshift shiv clattering to the concrete floor. Why? Rodriguez had demanded. Why tell us this? Gacy had smiled then, not the predator's grin Mac expected, but something almost human, almost broken, because I'm dying anyway, and because some sins are too heavy for one man to carry to hell. The prisoners had scattered after that, melting back into the shadows with their precious map and impossible hope. But Mac had remained frozen at his post, watching Gacy collect his scattered laundry as if nothing had happened. Now, 90 minutes later, Mac sat in the guard station surrounded by the familiar symphony of institutional night sounds. Distant coughing, the clank of pipes, footsteps echoing through concrete corridors. The same sounds that had been his soundtrack for 15 years. Ever since he'd traded his detective shield for a corrections uniform and the weight of his failures. Tommy's case file lay open on his desk, corners worn soft from handling. Crime scene photos spilled across the metal surface. A 17-year-old kid with Mac's sister's eyes, found in that crawl space on Summerdale Avenue 3 weeks after Gacy's arrest. Victim number 34, the one that broke Mac's career and his family. The one that should have been prevented if Detective Marcus Donnelly had been better at his job. Mac picked up the desk phone and dialed Detective Sarah Chen at Chicago PD. She answered on the second ring, alert despite the 4 a.m. hour. Chen, it's Mac. I need you to check something for me, quietly. A pause. Sarah owed him. He'd caught her husband's murderer 2 years before his transfer, and she'd never forgotten. What kind of something? Evidence, locker 247 at the 12th District. And, Mac's throat felt raw, Ray Kowalski's nephew. See if he has any arrests, any weapons charges that got buried. Mac, what the hell? Just do it, Sarah. and checked the records for Jimmy Torino. Missing person from '89, last seen near the biograph. The silence stretched long enough that Mac wondered if the line had gone dead. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice careful. "This about your convict? Maybe. Probably nothing. Right. Give me 2 hours." The line went dead. Mac leaned back in his chair, studying Gacy's cell through the monitor. The killer sat on his narrow bunk, reading a paperback novel as if he hadn't just detonated 3 potential bombshells under the Chicago justice system. Mac had spent 15 years believing he understood the world, good guys, bad guys, and the thin blue line between order and chaos. Gacy was supposed to be simple evil, the monster who killed Tommy and 33 others, the case that defined Mac's failures and justified his exile to this concrete purgatory. But if those 3 prisoners were right, if Gacy's information checked out, then everything Mac thought he knew was wrong. Innocent people were rotting in cells while killers walked free under police protection. The system he'd devoted his life to was as corrupt as the criminals it claimed to prosecute, and the monster he'd been guarding might be the only one telling the truth. Mac pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing down everything he could remember from the laundry room conversation. If Gacy was playing some elaborate game, Mac would expose it. If he was telling the truth, Mac didn't want to think about what that would mean. The yellow legal pad stared back at Mac like an accusation, his cramped handwriting filling 3 pages with details that could either vindicate 3 desperate men or prove him a fool for believing a serial killer. He set down his pen and rubbed his eyes, feeling every one of his 58 years settling into his bones like winter cold. The guard station's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that institutional pallor that made healthy skin look corpse gray. Mac had grown used to it over the years, the way a man grows used to chronic pain. Not acceptance, just the absence of hope for anything better. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner, brewing its 3rd pot since midnight. Strong enough to wake the dead, bitter enough to remind you why being alive wasn't always a blessing. Outside, Chicago slept under a blanket of November snow. The city Mac had once protected now feeling as distant as childhood. He'd grown up in Bridgeport, 3 blocks from where Richard Daley was born, back when being Irish and Catholic meant something more than a line on a census form. His old man had walked a beat for 30 years, came home every night to dinner and the Tribune, died in his sleep at 62 with his pension intact and his conscience clear. Simple times, simple choices. Mac's cell phone buzzed against his hip, a text from his daughter Katie in Portland. "Dad, Emma's recital is Sunday at 3. I know it's short notice, but she keeps asking if Grandpa Mac is coming. Can you get the time off?" He stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Emma was 7 now, gap-toothed and fearless. With Katie's stubborn chin and her late mother's gentle eyes, she played piano like an angel and asked questions that could stop your heart. "Why don't you live by us, Grandpa? Are you sad all the time? Do you miss Mommy?" Mac had visited twice since Diane's funeral 3 years ago. Cancer, quick and merciless, taking his ex-wife before they could repair what his obsession with Tommy's case had broken. Katie blamed him, not unreasonably. Hard to argue with a daughter who watched her father choose hunting ghosts over family dinners, case files over Christmas mornings. "I'll try, sweetheart," he typed back. "Give Emma my love." The lie came easily. He'd burned through his vacation days and couldn't afford the flight anyway. The divorce had taken half his savings, and 15 years of corrections work didn't exactly build a retirement nest egg. Besides, what would he tell them? That he spent his nights watching murderers and rapists? That he'd built his life around guarding the man who killed his nephew? Mac pulled Tommy's photo from the case file. School picture from his senior year, 17 and invincible in the way only teenagers could be. The kid had wanted to be a journalist, planned to study at Northwestern, write stories that mattered. Instead, he'd answered the wrong classified ad, trusted the wrong contractor, became another statistic in John Wayne Gacy's House of Horrors. "Should have protected you," Mac whispered to the photograph. "Should have been faster, smarter. Should have seen the pattern." The security monitor flickered, drawing his attention back to Gacy's cell. The killer had put down his book and was staring directly at the camera, as if he could see through the electronic eye into Mac's soul, those pale, watery eyes that had fooled neighbors, police, even kids who'd climbed into his car willingly. Mac's radio crackled. Tower 1, this is Garcia, in Block C. Everything quiet up there? Affirmative, Mac replied, his voice steadier than his hands. All clear. Garcia was new, maybe 6 months on the job, still believed the system worked the way it was supposed to. Still thought good guys wore badges and bad guys wore orange jumpsuits. Mac envied him that certainty, the way he envied his daughter's new life in Oregon, far from the shadows that had consumed his own. The snow fell harder now, coating the prison's razor wire in pristine white, beautiful and deadly, like everything else in Mac's world. He thought about those 3 prisoners, probably lying awake in their cells, clutching scraps of paper that might lead to freedom or just another dead end. Hope was a dangerous thing in a place like this, more likely to kill you than set you free. But what if Gacy was telling the truth? What if somewhere in Chicago, Jimmy Torino's bones waded in the cold ground behind an old movie theater? What if Detective Kowalski's nephew slept peacefully, while an innocent man rotted in maximum security? What if Mac's entire career had been built on lies wrapped in badges and buried under bureaucracy? Mac picked up his pen and added another line to his notes. Check timeline. When did I last work with Kowalski? What cases did we share? The questions multiplied like cancer cells, each one spawning 3 more. And somewhere in the spreading malignancy of doubt, Mac felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. Purpose. The desk phone rang at 6:17 a.m., its shrill tone cutting through the pre-dawn quiet like a blade. Mac had been dozing in his chair, the legal pad pressed against his chest, Tommy's case file scattered across his lap. He jerked awake, papers sliding to the floor as he grabbed the receiver. Guard station. Mac, it's Sarah. We need to talk. Detective Chen's voice carried a tension Mac had never heard before, not even when they'd worked her husband's murder. Ice formed in his stomach as he gathered the scattered files, suddenly wide awake. You found something. I found everything. A pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Jimmy Torino was reported missing October 15, 1989. Last seen outside the Biograph Theater after a late show. Case went cold after 6 weeks. Mac's pen moved across the pad automatically. And I took a metal detector to the lot behind the theater 2 hours ago. Northwest corner, 3 feet down, just like your source said. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Class ring from St. Ignatius High, 1987. Engraved JT wallet with Jimmy Torino's driver's license still inside. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker, or maybe it was Mac's vision. Jesus Christ. It gets worse. The wallet had a business card tucked behind the license. Kowalski Construction Company. Ray's side business from the 80s. Mac's hand stopped writing. Ray Kowalski. 30 years on the force, commendations for valor, the kind of cop who made the department look good in newspaper profiles. They'd shared a squad car for 8 months in '88, worked 6 cases together before Mac transferred to homicide. Sarah, tell me you didn't... I ran Kowalski's nephew through the system. Michael Kowalski, age 31. 3 arrests for aggravated assault, 2 for weapons charges. All charges dropped or reduced to misdemeanors. All 3 arresting officers transferred to different districts within 6 months. The guard station felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in like a closing fist. Mac thought of Williams, whose mother allegedly overdosed, sitting in his cell believing he'd failed to protect her. Of Knox, whose brother was doing life for a murder he didn't commit. Of Rodriguez, whose wife rotted in maximum security while the real killer walked free. Evidence locker 247? That's where it gets interesting. Papers rustled again. The locker's been sealed since 1991. Requires captain-level authorization to access. But I pulled the log. Guess who signed off on the last entry? Mac already knew. Kowalski. October 16th, 1989. 1 day after Jimmy Torino went missing. Entry reads, evidence transferred to secure storage pending investigation closure. No investigation number listed. No case file attached. The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. Jimmy Torino stumbles upon something he shouldn't see behind the theater. Maybe catches Michael Kowalski in the act of another crime. Gets killed for his trouble. Uncle Ray covers it up, plants evidence to frame someone else, buries the truth behind the blue wall of silence. How many others? How many innocent people locked away while connected killers walked free? Mac, there's more. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. I pulled the duty roster for October '89. Guess what case you and Kowalski were working together? Mac's blood turned to slush. Tommy. 3 weeks before his disappearance, you and Ray interviewed a contractor about suspicious activity in the area. Contractor named John Wayne Gacy. The phone slipped in Mac's sweat-slicked palm. He remembered that interview now, the details flooding back with crystal clarity. They'd received a tip about strange smells coming from Gacy's property, went to ask routine questions. Gacy had been charming, cooperative, even offered them coffee. Kowalski had seemed satisfied with the answers, pushed to close the interview early. Ray said the guy checked out clean, Mac whispered. Said we had better leads to follow. Mac, listen to me carefully. I need you to think about that interview. Did Kowalski do anything unusual? Anything that seemed off? Mac closed his eyes, forcing himself back to that day. The smell of autumn leaves, Gacy's nervous laugh, the sound of construction equipment in the background, and Kowalski checking his watch repeatedly, eager to leave, steering the conversation away from certain topics. He took a phone call, Mac said slowly. Personal call, he said, stepped outside for maybe 10 minutes. When he came back, he was ready to go. What kind of phone call requires stepping outside? The kind where you warn someone about a police investigation. The kind where you buy a killer time to clean up loose ends and eliminate witnesses. The kind where you sacrifice a 17-year-old kid to protect your nephew's secret. Tommy hadn't been random victim number 34. He'd been silenced because Mac and Kowalski were getting too close to the truth. And Kowalski had made sure the investigation went nowhere. Mac's hands shook as the full weight of betrayal crashed over him. 15 years of guilt, 15 years of believing he'd failed through incompetence rather than sabotage. 15 years of self-imposed exile while his partner's corruption walked free. Sarah, Mac said, his voice barely recognizable. I think I helped kill my nephew. The silence on the phone stretched until Mac thought Sarah had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured, the tone cops used when talking someone off a ledge. Mac, you need to listen to me. Don't do anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just sit tight until I can... Mac slammed the phone down, cutting her off. The crash echoed through the guard station like a gunshot, and several inmates stirred in their cells on the monitors. He stared at the screens without seeing them, his vision blurred by rage and 15 years of misdirected guilt. He'd blamed himself for Tommy's death, tortured himself with what-ifs and should-haves, destroyed his marriage, alienated his daughter, exiled himself to this concrete tomb, all while the real killer lived free under police protection, all while his partner laughed at the stupid Irish cop who bought the lie. The radio crackled. Tower 1, you copy? Sounded like something fell up there. Mac grabbed the radio with unsteady hands. False alarm, Garcia. All good. But nothing was good. Everything was contaminated, poisoned by corruption that went back decades. How many other cases had Kowalski compromised? How many other families were destroyed while connected criminals walked free? Mac's cell phone buzzed. Another text from Katie. Dad, I know you're probably working, but Emma drew you a picture for your birthday next month. She wants to mail it to you. What's your address there? The innocent question hit him like a physical blow. His granddaughter, drawing pictures for the man who'd helped kill her uncle through sheer stupidity. Katie, still hoping her father might find some scrap of redemption in the wreckage of his life. What address could he give them? The guard station where he'd wasted 15 years? The studio apartment where he drank himself to sleep most nights? The confession booth where he hadn't shown his face since Tommy's funeral? Mac stood abruptly, knocking over his coffee mug. The hot liquid spread across his notes, smearing ink like blood. He grabbed paper towels from the supply cabinet, dabbing uselessly at the mess while his hands shook with suppressed fury. On the security monitor, Gacy had moved to his small desk and was writing in what looked like a journal. The killer's pale head bent over the page, pen moving steadily across lined paper. Writing what? Confessions? More revelations that could destroy lives? Or just grocery lists and weather observations, the mundane thoughts of a monster playing human? The aging serial killer looked up suddenly, staring directly at the camera again. This time his expression was different, not the blank stare from before, but something almost sympathetic, as if he could see Mac's breakdown through the electronic eye, as if he understood the weight of carrying secrets that could destroy everything you thought you knew about justice. Mac's radio crackled again. "Tower 1, I've got Captain Morrison heading your way. Says he needs to speak with you." Mac's blood froze. Morrison never worked nights, never visited the guard stations unless something was seriously wrong. And at 6:30 a.m., after Mac had asked Sarah to dig into evidence that implicated a decorated detective, the timing couldn't be coincidence. "Copy that," Mac managed. His hands moved automatically, gathering Tommy's case file and shoving it into his desk drawer. The legal pad went into the trash, though he immediately regretted it. Too late now. Morrison's footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, accompanied by at least one other person. The door opened without a knock. Captain Morrison stepped inside, his gray hair perfectly groomed despite the early hour, his uniform crisp as fresh dollar bills. Behind him came someone Mac recognized but had hoped never to see again, Detective Ray Kowalski. 15 years had added weight to Kowalski's frame and lines to his face, but those cold blue eyes remained the same. Eyes that had watched Mac torture himself with guilt while knowing the truth. Eyes that had calculated how much one Irish cop's suffering was worth to protect a nephew's crimes. "Mac," Morrison said, his voice deceptively casual. "Ray here tells me you two worked together back in the day. Thought it might be nice for old partners to catch up." Mac forced his expression to remain neutral while his heart hammered against his ribs. "Captain Ray." Kowalski smiled, the same easy grin Mac remembered from their patrol days. "Good to see you, partner. Heard you've been keeping busy. Night shift treating you well?" The words carried subtle menace, a reminder of how far Mac had fallen while others rose. The question underneath was clear. Are you happy with your quiet little life? Do you really want to risk what little you have left? Mac glanced at the security monitor. Gacy had stopped writing and was watching the camera again, his pale eyes reflecting the fluorescent light like a predator's. "Can't complain," Mac said quietly. But inside, the fear was spreading like ice water through his veins. They knew. Somehow, they already knew. Morrison moved deeper into the guard station, his polished shoes silent on the linoleum floor. He paused at Mac's desk, noting the overturned coffee mug and scattered papers with the casual attention of a predator cataloging weaknesses. "You look tired, Mac," Morrison said, settling his bulk into the visitor's chair. "Been here what, 15 years now? That's dedication, loyalty, the kind of thing we value in this department." Kowalski remained standing, positioning himself between Mac and the door. The arrangement wasn't accidental. Mac recognized the formation from 100 interrogations. One friendly face, one silent threat, no easy exit. "Funny thing about loyalty," Morrison continued, pulling out his phone and setting it on Mac's desk. "Sometimes people forget where it belongs. Start digging around an old business that's better left buried." The phone's black screen reflected the fluorescent lights like a dead eye. Mac stared at it, understanding immediately. They'd intercepted his call with Sarah, probably had her line tapped the moment she started asking questions about evidence locker 247. "I got a call this morning," Morrison said. "Seems someone's been playing archaeologist at the old Biograph Theater. Metal detectors, evidence bags, the whole CSI routine. You know anything about that?" Mac's throat felt like sandpaper. "Can't say I do." Kowalski laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Come on, Mac, we're all friends here, no need to play dumb, though I gotta say you've gotten pretty good at it over the years." The casual cruelty in Kowalski's voice unlocked something dangerous in Mac's chest. 15 years of suppressed rage, 15 years of misdirected guilt, 15 years of watching this bastard walk free while innocent people rotted in cages. "Ray," Morrison warned, sensing the shift in atmosphere, "let's keep this friendly." Kowalski was enjoying himself too much to stop. "You remember Jimmy Torino, don't you, Mac? Sweet kid. Had his whole life ahead of him. Shame what happened to him. Course, these things happen when people stick their noses where they don't belong." Mac's vision tunneled. On the security monitor, Gacy had stood and moved to his cell window, pressing his face against the reinforced glass as if he could smell the violence building in the guard station 3 floors above. "Funny thing about Jimmy," Kowalski continued. His family never stopped looking for him. Poor bastards held vigils, hired private investigators, the whole grief circus. Never occurred to them that sometimes the truth is worse than not knowing. "Ray," Morrison's voice carried real warning now. "That's enough." But Mac had stopped listening to Morrison. All his attention focused on Kowalski's smirking face, the casual way he discussed a 17-year-old's murder, the complete absence of remorse in those cold blue eyes. "Tell me about your nephew," Mac said quietly. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kowalski's smile faltered, and Morrison straightened in his chair like a cobra preparing to strike. "My nephew's a good kid," Kowalski said carefully. "Works construction now, steady job, wife, 2 kids. Living the American dream." "The American dream," Mac repeated. "While Jimmy Torino's been feeding worms for 34 years. Morrison stood abruptly, his bulk filling the small space. "I think we're done here. Mac, you've got vacation days coming. Might be a good time to visit your daughter in Oregon. Clear your head, get some perspective." The threat was crystal clear. Take a vacation and forget what you learned, or face consequences that would make exile look like a promotion. Mac glanced at his phone, Katie's message still glowing on the screen. Emma's recital, the drawing she'd made, the granddaughter who still believed her grandfather might be a good man. "That's a generous offer," Mac said, "but I like it here. Quiet nights, interesting company." He gestured toward the security monitors. "You'd be surprised what people confess in the dark." Kowalski moved closer, his hand resting on the radio at his belt. "Some confessions are worth more than others. Some might even be worth enough to set certain people free. Of course, that would require believing the word of a convicted serial killer over decorated police officers." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a burning building. They knew about Gacy's revelations to the 3 inmates. They knew Mac had been watching, listening, recording. They knew exactly how much damage he could do if he chose to act on what he'd learned. "The thing about serial killers," Morrison said, his voice deceptively gentle, "is they're master manipulators. They'll say anything to get attention, cause trouble, destroy good people's lives. Smart folks don't listen to monsters." Mac looked at the security monitor again. Gacy had returned to his desk and was writing furiously now, his pale face intense with concentration. Whatever he was documenting, whatever secrets he was committing to paper, they represented Mac's only leverage against the corruption that had consumed his life. "You're right," Mac said finally. "Smart folks know better." But his hand was already moving toward the desk drawer where Tommy's file waited in the darkness, and in his chest, something that had been dead for 15 years began to stir back to life. The moment Morrison and Kowalski left, Mac yanked open the desk drawer and pulled out Tommy's case file with trembling hands. But this time, he wasn't looking at the crime scene photos or witness statements. This time, he flipped directly to the back section he'd avoided for 15 years. The administrative pages, the signatures, the chain of custody documentation. There, in black ink that had faded to brown, Ray Kowalski's signature appeared 17 times across 8 different evidence forms. Not unusual for an investigating detective, except Mac remembered with sickening clarity that Kowalski had only worked Tommy's case for the first week before being reassigned to higher priority investigations. Mac's finger traced the dates. October 15th through October 28th, 1989, 2 weeks after Kowalski had supposedly moved on to other cases. 2 weeks of evidence collection, witness interviews, and case management that Mac had never known about. His hands shook as he turned to the lead detective assignments page. His own signature was there, primary investigator, dated October 10th. But beneath it, in Morrison's unmistakable handwriting, Detective Donnelly to receive assistance from Detective Kowalski as needed for suspect interviews and evidence processing. Mac stared at the words until they blurred. He'd been the primary detective on his own nephew's murder case. He'd been in charge, responsible for every decision, every lead followed or abandoned. For 15 years, he'd believed he was just a junior detective who'd failed to catch the clues that might have saved Tommy's life. But he hadn't been junior anything. He'd been the lead. The realization hit him like ice water. Every time Kowalski had steered him away from certain witnesses, Every time his partner had insisted they focus on other leads, every time evidence had mysteriously gone missing or been misfiled, Mac had signed off on it. His signature, his authority, his responsibility. They hadn't just used him as a patsy. They'd made him complicit. Mac grabbed the desk phone and dialed Sarah's number with violent keystrokes. It rang once before a recorded message clicked on. "The number you have dialed is temporarily out of service. Please try your call again later." He tried her cell phone. Same message. Her police department extension. Same message. Sarah Chen had been disappeared. Mac's vision went white around the edges. 34 years of service, impeccable record, 2 daughters in college, and Morrison had erased her like chalk from a blackboard because she'd asked the wrong questions about the wrong evidence locker. The security monitor caught his attention. Gacy had moved to his cell door and was gripping the bars with both hands, staring directly into the camera lens. The killer's mouth was moving, but the audio was turned down. Mac fumbled for the volume control, cranking it up until Gacy's whispered words filled the guard station. "They killed her, you know. The lady cop who is helping you. Not dead, but close enough. Transferred to some desk job in Alaska where nobody will listen to her war stories." Gacy's pale eyes seemed to bore through the camera, through the concrete walls, directly into Mac's soul. "Just like they killed your nephew. Just like they're going to kill you if you don't wise up." Mac's blood turned to slush. How could Gacy possibly know about Sarah? Unless... "Oh, you're wondering how old John knows so much?" Gacy's laugh was like breaking glass. "Same way I've always known things, Mac. People talk to me. Guards, inmates, even the occasional corrupt captain who thinks a serial killer might be useful for keeping other people in line." The implications crashed over Mac like a collapsing building. Morrison hadn't just come to threaten him tonight. Morrison had been here before, probably many times, using Gacy as his own personal information network. The aging killer knew which inmates had family on the outside, which guards had gambling debts, which prosecutors had affairs. He was Morrison's eyes and ears, his weapon for maintaining control over anyone who might threaten the corruption that stretched back decades, and Mac had been feeding information directly to him. "But here's the thing, Detective Donnelly," Gacy continued, and Mac's heart stopped. Gacy had never called him detective before, had never acknowledged knowing his real identity. Sometimes the monster you think you're dealing with isn't the real monster at all. Sometimes the real monster wears a badge and a uniform and sleeps peacefully at night while innocent people suffer for his crimes. Mac stared at the monitor as understanding exploded through his brain like shrapnel. Morrison's smug confidence, Kowalski's casual cruelty, the way they'd walked into the guard station knowing exactly what Mac had discovered. It wasn't because they'd intercepted his calls or tapped Sarah's phone. It was because John Wayne Gacy had told them everything. The serial killer smiled at the camera, and for the first time in 15 years, Mac saw his real enemy clearly. Mac's hand froze on the volume control as Gacy's words echoed in the concrete box of the guard station. The serial killer's smile widened, and Mac realized with dawning horror that everything, his investigation, his calls to Sarah, even his growing suspicions about Morrison, had been orchestrated by the pale figure behind the reinforced glass. "You look surprised, Detective," Gacy continued, his voice crackling through the speaker with electronic distortion that made it sound like the whisper of a ghost. "Did you really think you were the first guard to stumble onto Morrison's little arrangement? The first to ask uncomfortable questions about evidence that disappeared and cases that went cold?" Mac's throat constricted. The guard station felt smaller now, the walls pressing closer like a tomb. 15 years of night shifts. 15 years of watching this monster through cameras and thinking he understood the nature of evil. But Gacy wasn't the spider at the center of the web. He was just another thread, carefully woven into a pattern that stretched back decades. "There was another guard," Gacy said, settling back into his chair with the casual comfort of a man revealing a favorite story. "Before you, nice fellow family man, started asking questions about why certain inmates got special treatment. Why some evidence went missing from lockup. Know what happened to him?" Mac didn't want to know, but Gacy told him anyway. "Overdose. Tragic accident, really. Seems he developed quite a heroin habit in his final months. Shocking how quickly a man can fall when he loses his job, his pension, his family's respect. Course, he swore up and down he'd never touched drugs in his life, but who believes a desperate junkie? The room spun around Mac like a carnival ride. Another guard, another man who'd gotten too close to the truth, another convenient death that covered up inconvenient questions. How many others had there been over the years? How many bodies had Morrison and his network buried to protect their empire? The beautiful thing, Gacy continued, is how they make you complicit before you even realize what's happening. You think you're investigating corruption, but really you're just painting a target on your own back. Every question you ask, every call you make, every document you request, it all gets reported back to them. Mac's cell phone buzzed again. Another text from Katie. Dad, are you okay? You usually answer by now. Emma keeps asking when Grandpa Mac is coming to visit. The innocent words felt like a knife between his ribs. Emma, drawing pictures for a grandfather she barely knew. Katie, still hoping her father might find redemption in the wreckage of his life. Neither of them understanding that Mac wasn't a hero seeking justice. He was a broken tool in the hands of killers. They're very good at finding pressure points, Gacy observed, as if he could read the text through the camera. Your daughter, your granddaughter, that little house in Oregon where they feel safe. Amazing how fragile safety can be when the wrong people decide you've become a problem. Mac's vision blurred with rage so pure it felt like religious ecstasy. This thing, this monster, was threatening his family. Not just threatening, promising. Gacy knew about Emma's drawings, about Katie's address, about the life Mac had tried so desperately to keep separate from this concrete hell. Now you're getting angry, Gacy said with obvious pleasure. Good. Anger is useful. Anger makes people do interesting things. Stupid things sometimes, but interesting nonetheless. Mac stood abruptly, his chair rolling back and slamming into the wall. The sound echoed through the guard station like a gunshot. On the monitor, Gacy leaned forward, his pale eyes bright with anticipation. The question is, the killer continued, what are you going to do with that anger? Are you going to storm down here and try to choke the life out of me? Are you going to call your corrupt captain and threaten to expose everything? Or are you going to be smart for once in your miserable life? Mac's hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body screamed for violence, for the clean simplicity of wrapping his fingers around Gacy's throat and squeezing until those pale eyes went dark forever. But beneath the rage, something colder was taking shape. Something that had been sleeping for 15 years was finally waking up. That's it, Gacy whispered. I can see it in your face now. You're finally understanding the game. Not the simple game you thought you were playing. Good cops versus bad cops. Justice versus corruption. The real game. The one where monsters like me are just weapons in the hands of monsters like them. Mac walked slowly toward the security monitor until his face was inches from the screen. Gacy's image stared back at him, distorted by the convex glass into something that looked less human and more like a pale insect trapped behind a lens. Tell me how to beat them, Mac said quietly. Gacy's smile became something terrible and knowing. Oh, Detective Donnelly, the killer whispered. You still don't understand, do you? You don't beat them, you become them. And lucky for you, I'm going to show you exactly how. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, vibrating with potential violence. Mac stared at Gacy's distorted face on the monitor, the killer's pale features warped by the convex glass into something that looked almost human but fundamentally wasn't. The guard station felt like a confessional booth, where the priest had turned out to be the devil himself. You want to know how to beat them? Gacy's voice crackled through the speaker, intimate as a lover's whisper. First, you accept that you've already lost the man you thought you were. That righteous detective seeking justice for his nephew? He died 15 years ago when you signed those evidence forms without reading them. What's sitting in that chair now is just meat that hasn't stopped moving yet. Mac's reflection stared back from the black screen of his phone. 15 years of night shifts had carved deep lines around his eyes, but it was more than age he saw there. It was the face of a man who'd been hollowed out from the inside, consumed by a guilt that had never been his to carry. Now, Gacy continued, you need to understand what you're really worth to them. You're not just a failed detective or a convenient patsy. You're proof of concept. living evidence that they can take a good man, break him, and use him for decades without him even knowing it. You're their greatest success story, Mac. The words hit like physical blows. Mac thought of all the nights he'd sat in this chair, watching monitors and believing he was doing penance for his failures. But Morrison and his network had been watching him watch, feeding off his self-destruction like vampires drawing sustenance from despair. "Stop," Mac said, his voice barely a whisper. "Oh, we're just getting started." Gacy leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed now. "See, what they never counted on was me getting old, getting bored. 34 years in this cage, and I've watched them parade their victims past my cell like a sick fashion show. Dead kids, ruined cops, broken families, all the collateral damage of their little empire." Mac's hands trembled as he reached for Tommy's file again. But this time, he wasn't looking at signatures or dates. He was looking at his nephew's school photo, clipped to the inside cover. 10 years old, gap-toothed smile, eyes bright with the kind of trust that only children possessed, the trust that adults wouldn't let monsters hurt them. Tommy was never meant to die, Gacy said, and Mac's world stopped turning. He was supposed to disappear, sure, become another runaway, another statistic. But that fool Morrison panicked when the boy recognized Kowalski from a school visit. Community outreach, they called it. Officer Friendly visits the classroom. The photo slipped from Mac's nerveless fingers. Tommy had mentioned that day, excited about the policeman who'd talked to his class about safety. Stranger danger, he'd called it, laughing at the rhyme. Sweet Jesus, Tommy had recognized his own killer. So they dumped him where they knew he'd be found, Gacy continued remorselessly. Made it look like one of mine, nice and neat. Let Uncle Mac torture himself for 15 years while the real monsters walked free. Mac's vision grayed at the edges. All this time, all these years of believing he'd failed to catch the clues that might have saved Tommy, and his nephew had been murdered specifically to destroy him. Not collateral damage in some larger scheme, but a deliberate assassination of Mac's soul. "Now you're seeing it," Gacy whispered. "The real scope of what you're up against. This isn't about corruption or cover-ups. This is about power. The power to decide who lives, who dies, who suffers, who prospers. They've been playing God in this city for 40 years, and you've been their favorite toy." Mac stood again, but this time there was no rage in the movement. Just a cold, crystalline clarity that felt like ice forming in his veins. He walked to the security panel and began flipping switches, killing the cameras one by one. C block, D block, the exercise yard, the visiting room, until only Gacy's cell remained illuminated on the wall of monitors. "That's my boy," Gacy said approvingly. "No witnesses for what comes next." But Mac wasn't walking toward the cell blocks. Instead, he moved to the emergency communication panel and pulled out the master key Morrison had issued him 15 years ago. The key that opened every door, every lock, every secret in the entire facility. "You want to know the beautiful irony?" Mac said, his voice steady for the first time in years. "You're right about everything except one thing. I'm not their greatest success story. I'm going to be their greatest failure." He inserted the key into the emergency broadcast system and turned it. Suddenly, every speaker in the facility crackled to life. Cell blocks, administrative offices, guard stations, even Morrison's private office 3 floors above. Every conversation, every secret, every whispered conspiracy would now be broadcast throughout the entire prison. On the monitor, Gacy's pale eyes went wide with something Mac had never seen there before, genuine surprise. "What are you doing?" the killer demanded. Mac smiled, the first real smile he'd managed in 15 years. "I'm becoming exactly who they made me," he said. "A man with nothing left to lose." The emergency broadcast system hummed to life with a sound like the world taking its first breath. Mac pulled the microphone toward him, its weight solid and real in his hands, the first thing that had felt real in 15 years. "This is Marcus Donnelly, night guard at Cook County Correctional." His voice echoed through every speaker in the facility, bouncing off concrete walls and steel bars, reaching into the darkness where secrets lived and died. "For the past hour, I've been having a conversation with John Wayne Gacy about my nephew Tommy's murder, about corruption that goes back 40 years, about bodies that were never meant to be found. On the monitor, Gacy had gone perfectly still, his pale eyes fixed on something beyond the camera's reach. Even the monster seemed stunned by the scope of what Mac was unleashing. "Some of you listening know exactly what I'm talking about," Mac continued. "Captain Morrison, Detective Kowalski, whoever else is still breathing and still collecting paychecks bought with blood money. You thought you broke me 15 years ago. You thought you turned me into your perfect victim, a man so consumed with guilt he'd never look past his own failures to see yours." Through the static, Mac could hear distant sounds echoing from the cell blocks. Inmates stirring, voices calling out, the machinery of institutional routine grinding to a halt as his words penetrated every corner of the facility. "But here's what you never understood about broken things," Mac said, thinking of Tommy's gap-toothed smile, of Sarah Chen's badge sitting in some evidence locker, of his own face in 15 years of darkened windows. Sometimes they don't stay broken. Sometimes they become something else entirely. He reached into the evidence file and pulled out the crime scene photos he'd memorized like prayers. Tommy's small body, arranged to look like Gacy's work, the deliberate staging that he'd missed because he was too consumed with self-hatred to see the careful choreography of his nephew's murder. "Tommy Donnelly was 10 years old when you killed him," Mac said, his voice carrying across the silent facility like a judgment. He recognized Officer Kowalski from a school visit. "Community outreach, you called it. So you made him disappear, then dumped his body where you knew it would destroy the one cop in the family." The microphone felt warm in his hands now, alive with electric potential. Mac thought of Emma's drawings, of Katie's worried texts, of the life he'd tried to build from the ashes of his failures. They were safe in Oregon, far from this concrete tomb. But their safety had always been an illusion, dependent on his silence. "Detective Sarah Chen started asking questions 2 weeks ago," Mac continued. "Good questions about evidence that went missing, cases that went cold, bodies that disappeared. So you disappeared her too. Transferred to Alaska, they'll say. Voluntary relocation. Just like the guard before me died of an overdose, and the prosecutor before him had that convenient heart attack." On the monitor, Gacy slowly raised his hand to the camera, pressing his palm against the reinforced glass. For a moment, the serial killer looked almost human, just an old man trapped in a cage, watching the world burn down around him. "But 34 years is a long time to keep secrets," Mac said. "Even monsters get tired. Even devils want redemption." He thought of the 3 inmates who'd cornered Gacy weeks ago, how they'd emerged from that encounter changed, not because Gacy had hurt them, but because he'd given them something they'd never expected: truth, the location of bodies that could free their families from suspicion, evidence that could overturn wrongful convictions. "The beautiful irony," Mac whispered into the microphone, "is that John Wayne Gacy, a man who killed 33 people, might be the most honest person in this building." Alarms began blaring somewhere in the facility. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the guard station in pulsing red. Mac could hear boots pounding on concrete, voices shouting orders, the sound of men scrambling to contain a catastrophe that had already spread too far to stop. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Katie's last message. "Dad, are you okay?" "I am now," he typed back. "I love you and Emma. Tell her Grandpa Mac kept his promise." The guard station door exploded inward. Morrison stood in the doorway, flanked by officers Mac didn't recognize, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. "Step away from the microphone, Donnelly," Morrison snarled. But Mac was already moving toward the monitor, toward Gacy's pale face watching from behind reinforced glass. The master key felt light as a feather in his hand. "Some promises," Mac said into the microphone, his voice carrying to every corner of the facility, "are worth dying for." He smiled at his reflection in the darkened screen, the face of a man who had finally, after 15 years of penance, found his way home.